What are the three key fantasy football questions facing the 2022 Indianapolis Colts as they open training camp and head into the preseason? It's time to break it down right here and right now as we begin another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
Are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer, and I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. Thanks for joining us and making us your first listen today. We're free and available to you on all platforms. And today, the spotlight falls in our preview series on the Indianapolis Colts. What we do, we look at three key questions facing all 32 teams in the NFL. We're now into the AFC South, our penultimate division. The AFC West is on deck. So we already broke down the Texans for you and the key questions for that team. So we'll start this week with the Colts. We'll go to the Jaguars. We'll get to the Titans. Then we'll go into the AFC West. A lot of exciting potential for that division in fantasy football. So we'll look at the Broncos and Chiefs. So action-packed week as we go back to 5 shows here as training camp gets revved up. And we'll be with you 5 days a week here from now through the end of the football season. So a lot of good stuff coming your way. Advanced scouting until we get to draft mode, and then in season to help you dominate as well. That's what we do here. No nonsense, to the point fantasy football analysis only on Locked On Fantasy Football. Now, let's get right to it and break down the Indianapolis Colts. Before we do that, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season. More props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, the Colts, we'll start at quarterback, as we always do with these teams. And our Colts quarterback question is, can we trust Matt Ryan to be anything more than a deep QB2? In reality, the Colts went out and got Matt Ryan because they were tired of Carson Wentz improvising and playing outside of the offense. They wanted more of a Phillip Rivers type, who they had a couple years ago, that's going to be more of a traditional pocket passer, distribute the ball, be kind of a point guard in their run-heavy offense featuring Jonathan Taylor. So that's why they went to Matt Ryan. Wentz just was up and down. He would force things that weren't there and make mistakes. The Colts realized, again, we can run the ball at a high level here. We have a great offensive line, a premier feature back, the number one in the league right now, and looking at our defense that can help us win a lot of games. So they wanted someone to make fewer mistakes and put them in worse jams here, not put them in the same type of situations that Carson Wentz did. And they want to be able to get back to the playoffs. So they saw Matt Ryan as more of that stabilizing force, and he wanted out of the Falcons. As soon as they thought about going after Deshaun Watson, Matt Ryan wanted a new home. He found one pretty quickly. The Colts were aggressive to make that move and move on from Wentz. Wentz now with the Washington Commanders. So Matt Ryan, he's been a Falcon all the way. That's the only team we've seen him play for at some varying fantasy football levels since 2008. So this is a big transition here for Matt Ryan. We know he's had the elite receivers going back in the day to Roddy White and Tony Gonzalez, then pivoting to Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley by the end of his time there. So he's put up some big numbers, including the 2016 MVP season, where he was awesome in fantasy and reality. That Matt Ryan is long gone, however. That is now 6 years ago. So you're looking at Matt Ryan, the arm strength has definitely declined quite a bit here. He can't push the ball downfield the way he used to, but he's not totally incompetent either as a passer. He can get the ball in the hands of guys when they need to, playing off the running game. So I just don't see a lot of upside with Matt Ryan in fantasy football, however, because there's not a lot here. When you look at the receiving core, you have Alec Pierce as your number 2. You got Paris Campbell coming off several injury-riddled years, Ashton Dulin, and those guys all are behind Michael Pittman Jr. So there's not a lot of source of production here that you can look at Matt Ryan. We know he's had the receivers and he's put up the numbers in Atlanta, but Indianapolis Pittman is their best receiver by far. Pierce still getting his feet wet as a rookie. He's very talented out of Cincinnati, but there's a lot to worry about here. This receiving core, Mo Ali Cox, he's your top tight end, and there's some of that familiarity for Ryan from his days with Gonzalez, as we mentioned, and Austin Hooper in the later days before he moved on to Cleveland. So there's some familiarity here, but there's not anything that you're going to get from Matt Ryan that's going to blow you away. I think in certain matchups, he can be pretty good. And we know that they're facing the Texans twice and the Jaguars twice. So that helps if you can get some value out of that. And I think Carson Wentz gave you that last year. He actually finished pretty well with his numbers. So I just don't see that same level. I think they're going to reel in Matt Ryan, make him more of a caretaker type quarterback. I think they relied on Wentz too much as a playmaker, and he burned them a little bit making those mistakes. So when you change quarterbacks or you change coaches in the NFL, you typically go for something that's the opposite of what you had last time, or different at least. Wouldn't say it's a complete 180 because you still have to play within the system of Frank Reich, but in terms of the athleticism, you don't have much of that. Wentz still had a strong arm. You don't have a lot of that with Ryan. So short to intermediate passing is where the Colts are going to be when they're not throwing the ball downfield, playing off play action. I can see a few of those shots here, but everything about this team is built for running and short to intermediate passing as the bread and butter. And if you're not a running quarterback the way that Matt Ryan is not, you're not going to get those extra sources of fantasy football production. Right now, you look at his ranking, he's pretty much in the 20s, no matter how you slice it. That's pretty low as a QB2. So he's going to help with his reality presence to facilitate the fantasy football playmakers on this team. But in terms of being autonomously a target here in fantasy football drafts, you can do a lot better both before and after Matt Ryan there to find your quarterback. All right, we will get into that key running back question surrounding the Colts in our second segment here in Locked On Fantasy Football. Before we do that, I have to tell you about BetOnline.net, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all of your favorite sports and events at the number one online source for odds, lines, and games. And as we're waiting for NFL season to kick off, there's some futures and props that we can look at. There's Major League Baseball in full swing. NBA and NHL will be back before you know it. Combat sports, esports, and golf are going on right now that you can get some action on. So you can find all the reviews and news that you need of every league at BetOnline. And BetOnline continues to be the top online source for your sporting wagering information. From live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts, they have you covered. It's easy to get even on BetOnline. You just go to BetOnline today. You can use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, we will continue the show here in a moment here on Locked On Fantasy Football. I got to tell you, though, with training camps opening, you got to check out all the podcasts here on the Locked On NFL Network. Our team-by-team reporters and correspondents and podcasters are going to take you through the hottest happenings all around the camp. And we mean hot because it's in late July, early August. Every team should be opening up here by the end of the week. So looking forward to that and the breakdowns as there's the insight and interviews you want from every camp. Your favorite team, we've got you covered here. Your team every day, the Locked On Network. All right, let us ask that key fantasy football question with the Colts backfield. Is Jonathan Taylor the unquestioned number one overall pick in fantasy football leagues? Yes, the answer is yes. I mean, this kid is special. The offense hasn't changed. The same philosophy here that they're going to be run heavy. Taylor's going to be the centerpiece. He doesn't miss practice. He's very durable. Going back to Wisconsin, all this guy does is produce and run well. He's also proved to be a pretty adept receiver here. I know Nyheim Hines is there, still hanging around as the number two back, but Hines' role is diminished a little bit. Taylor is still very valuable as they feature back, and he's young. He's got the fresh legs. He just is built well to handle the big workload with the touches, and I don't think they're going to ease up on him. So Jonathan Taylor, in every format that you look at, standard, half point, full PPR, he's been the guy here in the rankings. Everyone's taking him that way. Look, he's the safest. You look at the other guys, and there's a lot of injury issues. When you look at Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara's had his share. He's got a suspension potentially. Dalvin Cook tends to miss games. Derrick Henry is a question mark. Nick Chubb is in the potential timeshare with the Kareem Hunt and has a capped upside there. Najee Harris, we talked about him maybe being able to be where Jonathan Taylor is from year two. He still has some things he's got to work out because he doesn't have that same offensive line or the competency of a veteran quarterback yet that he can rely upon. So you can look at Jonathan Taylor individually and say, look, this kid is special. He's a pure talent at running back that is going to get the job done. He's in a run-heavy offense. Nothing has changed. There's no durability issues right now. Everything lines up well for Jonathan Taylor to build on his breakout season as a feature back. And then there's no good case for anyone else that you would look at. You're not going to go look at a quarterback or a wide receiver there over what you're going to get in Jonathan Taylor. And do I expect him to be even more productive? I think he can match the level of production. I think the touchdowns are primarily going to be his domain here. There's not a lot of guys that can pop in. Hines is not that type of runner. And you also look at their third running back, which is notable, Philip Lindsay. So Lindsay is not a guy that is big or a guy that they would trust in the red zone. And you have Tyson Williams. Remember him? He flashed a little bit for the Ravens before he fell out of favor with the veteran carousel they had to replace J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards last year. So there's not a lot of backs that are going to pilfer the key touches here from Jonathan Taylor. They're going to trust him as much as possible here. He's feeling good. I think he has a chance to put up an MVP campaign because the Colts, again, defense and running game is the bread and butter of what they want to do. And with Matt Ryan in there, that is going to say, yeah, we're going to do more of that. They're very good all over the offensive line. Quentin Nelson. They had a change at left tackle, but I still think you get the Colts, 4/5 of their offensive line really built to run effectively here in 2022. So Taylor sets up really nicely. I could see duplicate season. I don't even think last year was a career year close to that. I think there's a lot more that he could do. So look, just don't worry about other backs and that are on this team. Don't worry about other backs on other teams. There's just not any good reason to pivot away from Jonathan Taylor. So I really like him as the number one. Overall, they're a very good argument for him. So just think about it. If you win your lottery in your redraft leagues, just go Jonathan Taylor. Just don't think about it. That is the prize you won. Just you feel confident that he can put up the big numbers. I could even see the potential for that golden goose of the 20 touchdown season. Yeah, I think that is definitely in reach of Jonathan Taylor here. So he could be one of those rare backs that we've seen over the years, going back to the Priest Holmes and the Sean Alexanders and the LaDainian Tomlinsons. These are guys that can carry your team. Marshall Faulk, we've also seen that with this a monster season from scrimmage and putting up those 20 TDs. So I definitely could see that. There's no question. He's got that kind of ceiling on top of the high floor he has. So that's the beauty of Jonathan Taylor in this offense. So just do it. Forget it. If you're got the number one pick, you won't be up at night figuring out what you want to do. You have complete control of that, and there's only one way to go here with Jonathan Taylor as the first overall pick in fantasy. It doesn't matter what format you're playing at. If you're in a season-long league, do it. If you drafted Jonathan Taylor in a reasonable spot in Dynasty, keep him. There's just no reason to not want him on your fantasy football team because he can carry it from week to week with this consistency. I think he's going to be a century mark guy from scrimmage almost every week, and touchdown is potential. So you're automatically, if you get to the 100 yards and the touchdown, even if you're not incorporating half or full point PPR, you're looking at 16 points from your RB1. And that's fantastic to know you're going to be there almost every week and you're actually going to exceed that total. So too many issues with other guys, no issues with Taylor, no brainer. Jonathan Taylor, fully deserving of that number one overall pick. And just don't second guess yourself and try to get cute. He's the guy. Just lock it in. All right, we will break down the key question with the Colts wide receiver core in our final segment here on Locked On Fantasy Football. I do have to first mention to you about an exciting new sponsor. It is Dave and Dave.com. And with Dave, what you're getting is a help from future you. Level with me, we've all been in a situation at some point in our lives when you're a little tight on cash. Maybe you can only afford to put a few gallons of gas in your tank or limited groceries, and you're wondering how you can do other things such as go on a date night or buy a gift for a wedding. That's where Dave can help. If you're living paycheck to paycheck or struggling to make ends meet, can be really stressful when unexpected expenses come up. Now, Dave can help you get out of a pinch when you really need it. Hindsight is 2020, and you can't change the past, but what if you could get a little help from your future self? Maybe you'd like to ask yourself to borrow a little cash from future you. Now you can with Dave. Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with their extra cash feature. That's more money to fill your tank, go out on a date, buy a wedding gift, or just catch up on bills. You can finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hangups. And the best part, there's no interest and no credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get their financial relief that they need with extra cash. So you're in a pinch right now and you need some extra help. Download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. It's easy to do. Just download the Dave app from the App Store. That's Dave, just like the person's name, D-A-V-E, D-A-V-E, Dave. Sign up for extra cash account. You'll get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. Future you will thank you. All right, it is time to continue the show here on Locked On Fantasy Football and wrap it up looking at the 2022 Indianapolis Colts. We're looking at their 3 key fantasy football questions on deck. Tomorrow will be the Jacksonville Jaguars there. So continue our look at the teams of the AFC South. We're almost looking at all 32 teams. If you missed any of those teams, check those out on our archives. We broke them all in detail for you ahead of camp and preseason. Camps opened this week. So excited to see some of these things come together. And I'm excited to see this player. We'll frame it around him. It's Michael Pittman Jr. Will Michael Pittman Jr. live up to his wide receiver 1 hype? That's a simple question here. We already like Jonathan Taylor as the RB1 to beat all RB1s this year. Pittman has been going really high in drafts, ahead of Tyreek Hill, ahead of guys that you've associated with being number ones for a long time. He's right up there with CeeDee Lamb in the rankings. And really, why do we see Michael Pittman Jr. rank so high? Well, he's the complete package as a number 1. He can operate as a big slot. He's a good possession guy outside. And as we mentioned, when your number 2 is Alec Pierce, a rookie, and then you get to Paris Campbell, hasn't seen a lot of action because of injuries, then Ashton Dulin, Desmond Patton, you have Michael Strahan, and Kiki Kuti is on the roster as the 7th wide receiver. Really, you're in position to dominate targets. Another key guy that's gone is Jack Doyle. So there's no Jack Doyle at tight end. Ali Cox is trying to pick that up. Colin Granson has flashed a little bit there at tight end, but it really comes down to Taylor dumping off to him, using a little bit of Hines there in the backfield as well. Ali Cox is your security blanket at tight end for Matt Ryan. But Pittman, there's a lot of similarities between Michael Pittman Jr. and Calvin Ridley. And that's good news because he's kind of a big slot they can put in. And also the key thing with Pittman, he can be a massive red zone force. So when Jonathan Taylor's not popping into the end zone, their best target's going to be Pittman. He's got the big slot ability. He can also line up on the outside, use his body to position himself and go up and get the ball. Those are the type of receivers you like quite a bit. So there's a little bit of Mike Williams buzz for Pittman. I don't think Pittman is the same type of pure speedster, but he can scheme himself open. He can work inside or outside. I think Matt Ryan is his type of quarterback who's going to put the ball in position for him to succeed a lot this season. Again, that Ryan Ridley comparison makes a lot of sense, what you're looking for in Ryan and Pittman, and the target should be massive here. He should get a high volume, much like we talked about with Amari Cooper. Look, you might have some concerns about the other guys not getting open, or is the quarterback going to be confident enough, especially if you have Deshaun Watson missing a lot of games. Sure, Matt Ryan is going to be a consistent force. I mean, the one thing about Matt Ryan, he doesn't usually miss a lot of games, and if they had to pivot, their backup is Nick Foles. So Foles can definitely get the ball to Pittman. So you've got some ways to keep Pittman protected as a key target for the Colts. So I just think he can do everything. I've been high on this guy for quite a while. I think he's been limited a little bit by the quarterback transitions here in Indianapolis, but I think this is the best one suited for his skill set here to go up and get the ball and make plays. So really excited to see what he can do. Yet Alec Pierce, there's some buzz about him as a sleeper, but he's a rookie. He's very fast, and he has some big playability. Campbell, we've talked about him and his quickness and being able to get open in the slot. But Pittman, again, has the most versatility of all these 3 receivers. He's the most reliability there as well, having had the most time on the field for this particular team. So He's in the groove with what Frank Reich wants to do in the passing game and playoff Matt Ryan. Everything lines up well, and I think you're going to get some nice playoff Taylor for sure. Here again, Taylor's going to draw a lot of attention. Pittman's going to see some favorable coverage there because of people worrying about the Colts running game. Pittman, I think he's a special kid, a good pedigree. We know that from his father being a pretty productive running back in the day for the Cardinals and Buccaneers and some other teams. So good pedigree, good to the style of receiver here that you're looking for in the modern game with good catch radius. And again, just good hands, smooth route running. So if he gets a massive volume of targets, he's going to be rather efficient with that here in 2022. So yeah, I think there's a reason that the hype is there. Again, the line helps, the Ryan Pittman connection helps, having the play action and the focus on the running game is going to help. If Pierce and Campbell can show a little bit here and make some plays playing off him, that'll be helpful as well. So Pittman can get through that, but they can move him inside again. That really helps to get away from the double teams. If teams want to focus to take him out of the game, there's ways to work around him and scheme him open. And I think the Colts know that, and they're going to do everything they can here. So this is the year for Michael Pittman to really enforce himself and establish himself as a top flight fantasy football receiver. All right, there you have it. There's a breakdown of the key questions, the three keys that we want to focus on the Indianapolis Colts as they head into the 2022 season. So good breakdown there. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. Now make your second listen to Locked On NFL Podcast, our national NFL experts and insiders. Keep fans dialed in with the biggest stories and latest news from around the league, because in the offseason doesn't equal break in the action. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time with a look at the Jacksonville Jaguars.